The reason I decided to tell my story was because I was going through another personal breakup and wondering what it meant for me, what it meant for my children. Realizing you're being looked at has an impact. There's just something about it that is transforming. It makes it so much more of a public statement. It's pushing things out. You're taken out of the situation in which you're used to reacting normally. Most demands a different response. Rescuer psychology is very much a part of what directs me. I want to find these problems and somehow fix them. It has driven everything, the way my relationships are, the kind of jobs I take. I went to work on the Hill. I'm a lobbyist here in Washington. I do a lot of work on music, entertainment, intellectual property, international issues. We're a public affairs firm, and we do work on problems people have with government, changing legislation or dealing with the regulatory system.
There'll be more.
I'm involved in cherry blossom festivals, put on events, opening ceremonies, concerts. The fishbowl of Washington politics accentuates everything. It accentuates the self-importance. The relationships here are defined by this power scheme.
We'll just be talking about music
Grew up on a small farm outside of Pittsburgh. My parents were mill workers and union organizers, farmers. My family on both sides tended to be very Marxist. We had the union wars there. Cool streams with fish and minnows and frogs. Build forts and chase animals. Goats being born frozen, baby goats, because they were born too early. And calling my mother and having to rush them to the stove to thaw them out and having them revive. And I remember that my whole life, and it's still part of my life. Yeah, it was wonderful. My mother believing animals should be cherished and loved as God's creatures, pretty much. My father being the farmer was that animals were to be used, and if they didn't have an economic use, they were to be gotten rid of. I had a dog that was a border collie, and it was born the same week I was. So my dad brought it home, and I was raised with it. So that dog ate a chicken, and I was begging him not to hurt her, and he went and got a .22. And even with me tugging at him, he put a bullet right between our eyes. I, of course, never got over it. I had worked in several of the aspects of the civil rights movement. What made that movement successful was what it was, the nonviolent aspect. I'm incapable of being able to restrain myself and take a beating when it clearly would have such a good result. And that's always bothered me. And so the function I was given was raising money at the time. Served 3 years in the Marines, served in Vietnam. I was a Vietnamese linguist, intelligence officer, and a company commander. Was strongly opposed to it. I insisted on going. My mother was horrified. She was a pacifist, and I think that I have never been able to explain that to anyone's satisfaction, maybe not even my own. That things tend to develop their own storylines after a while, and you filter so many of the inconsistencies out. I often wonder whether my current recollection is really right. One evening, we'd had a bunch of helicopters coming in with wounded civilians, and one of them was a woman who was very bloody, and the only capture data she had on her was a tag that said VC. It looked like she'd been shot and was not going to make it. She survived, and we had gotten her cleaned up, that she was a 12-year-old girl. She had been raped by several troops. I tried very hard to bring charges against the patrol that had gone out. And of course, the evidence disappeared and the stories changed. I think it was symptomatic of some of the things that happened when you're so intensely involved in the moment. It gave us no clue as to what it all meant in the long term. It's hard for someone who hasn't been through those situations to understand what it can mean as far as a transforming experience. I tend to end up and marry the ones who had the more traumatic backgrounds, and that I almost search it out, I think. I think that falling in love is in some sense a madness. Yeah, it really is. Commit ourselves to a tremendous ignorance and ignore all of the very obvious frictions that are going to exist. This is excruciatingly painful to me because it did happen once before. Dissatisfaction with my own judgment, my own behavior. How could I have allowed it to happen twice? That there's always something about us, for whatever reason, that we can't quite lay out. I know it's something we now say is a great goal, to reveal yourself, but I think it's also impossible. The function of memory is to make our life more livable and understandable. The downside to analyzing your life is that it interferes with living it. Time is all we have. We're issued some, and we don't know how much we're issued. Don't teach our children that. We don't even learn it ourselves. We sort of got away from just being able to enjoy ourselves day to day with each other. I think the world is poorer for the way it's happening now.